Hello and welcome to this webinar for Year 11 Narrative Writing. There are three key learning aims that I hope we can cover together today. Understanding the marking criteria for narrative writing at grade 5, effective characterization at grade 5, and using the narrative arc at grade 5. Now, all of this comes with a warning. Obviously, grade 5 is a notional grade. Exam boards set the grade criteria and the grade boundaries, and year to year those boundaries can change, so you need to be aware of that. We're looking at a specific assignment today: write a story about a journey, and that comes for AQA in paper 1, question 5, or section B, the fiction writing section. Now, what does grade 5 mean? Well, grade 5 means that you are a consistent candidate. To secure that grade 5, it means that you don't do anything that's silly or mindless or unnecessary or random. It's not inappropriate. Everything is consistent. Everything is as it should be, and you follow the instructions really closely. It means that you're a kind of candidate that will think. So you're a thoughtful candidate, you're going to plan, you'll write, you'll check, and then you'll rewrite anything that needs to be done, because grade 5 is consistent and there aren't huge gaping mistakes for grade 5. In the last few years, grade 5 has meant around 65%, which is about 24 and above out of 40 in the mark scheme. And that, for the mark scheme, again means that it's mid-level 3 in the mark scheme. And again, that comes with a warning, because year to year this changes. We don't want you to go back to your teacher and say, this is 65%, you need to award me a grade 5. Teachers do it differently, exam boards do it differently, but I hope that the advice that I give you today will really help you to secure this kind of standard of writing. Now, let's look a bit more closely at the mark scheme itself. You'll remember that for writing, there are two key sections. There's the content and organization, and the criteria is what I call CAVE. So it's about communication. So is the register and the purpose really clear, and clearly is the purpose matched, the register matched to the audience, the vocabulary, the structure, the connected ideas, engagement. So are you using linguistic features, adjectives and similes? Even though it's a narrative and a story, you're adding interest for your readers through using a wide range of different language features. That's the first part of the marking criteria, CAVE. And the second part is what I call VSPAG, technical accuracy. So you can see here for a grade 5, for 24 marks roughly and above, you'll need to think about securing a level 3, not a low level 3, but a mid-level 3. So to try and get 14, 15, 16 for your content and organization, and then to get the 9, 10, 11 perhaps for your technical accuracy. So for this particular assignment, you would make it consistently interesting. You would have an appealing protagonist, and there'd be relevant content the whole way through. So your protagonist would be on a journey. It would be might be a physical journey, an emotional journey, a psychological journey. You would also think about appropriateness. So there'd be different levels of formality that would be maintained. And even in dialogue, you wouldn't necessarily split too much unless that's really showing the character. You'd also, for a level 5, a grade 5, think about vocabulary that is varied and interesting and descriptive. Even though they were telling the story, you're still using varied and descriptive detail. So you might say something like a fleecy crowns of cloud encircled the radiant moon. So even though it's just a sentence to set the backdrop of the setting rather than giving the story, you're still thinking about using metaphor, you're still thinking about choosing those adjectives carefully. And then the engagement and structure. So in this journey, you would have one event linked closely with another. There might be foreshadowing and flashback that breaks it up. So it's a bit more non-chronological. So it's consistently interesting, consistently good for your reader. What about for VSPAG? Well, you'd be thinking about vocabulary again. You'd be using words for effect, not ordinary words. You'd be elevating and selecting words carefully instead of big, colossal, instead of scary, intimidating, instead of horrible, unpleasant. You'd be thinking about spelling, the accurate spelling, there. You'd be thinking about punctuation, particularly end punctuation and lists, full stops, full stops, exclamation marks, question marks, ... colons for list, maybe speech. And you'd also be thinking about varying your sentences. So this is some general advice, really, before we go into the more specific advice for this particular assignment. So general advice really is for grade 5, think about your sentence openers. Make sure that they're interesting. You can think about I-space. So using ing, similes, prepositions, adverbs, complex conjunctions and ed words or emotions at the beginning of sentences, instead of just writing I or the or he or she or they at the beginning of sentences, to vary that. Okay, so that's some very, very general advice. Let's think more specifically about this particular piece. Before we move on, this is the 40% is really key, because for the VSPAG, obviously it's worth 40% of your overall grade. So characterization should be linked with your purpose. Your overall purpose for your story that's about a journey may well be that you want it to be exciting, you want it to be entertaining. So you would include characters that are athletic and daring or risk-taking or fun-loving, like scientists or athletes, or a reporter as your main character, as your protagonist. However, you may want your story about a journey to be disturbing. You want it to be unsettling for your readers. So you would include characters perhaps that are cruel or unkind or impatient somehow. Perhaps you'd have someone who's a chef, who's kind of impatient, someone who's fraud, or someone who's a felon, to really upset readers by presenting an anti-hero kind of character rather than someone who is that we look up to. Or you might decide for your journey story that you actually want to take this as an opportunity to present serious issues. So you may well look at a character that has some kind of disadvantage or some kind of disability or has experienced inequality, so that as well as our sympathy growing, our respect grows for the character, and you're raising those ideas and themes that are more serious. Let's talk about indirect characterization. You can see here that there are 4 characters that you may well want to use for your journey. And instead of saying directly, he is a doctor, he is a musician, he is a scientist, he is a teacher, he is a criminal, you're not saying that, you're giving description, you're giving specific details, you're giving clues, you're adding to the mystery and the intrigue. And you're also thinking, right, my character may well have a secret. What could the secret be, and how could I add to the secrecy and the mystery and the intrigue? So you may well have a character that's got, bites her nails, and she's got bags under her eyes, and her hands are stained. So this could well be a doctor who's staying up all night writing the reports after they're helping their parents. Or it could be a reporter, again, staying up all night and reporting. That's why you've got the pen. So you're adding those specific details to really get your readers to think. Again, this character who wears odd socks and has a beard and carries coffee around with them, is that a musician? Is he a scientist? Is there something about him that we really like, because he's someone who's always thinking and always needs to be aware and alert, but doesn't really have practical kind of tendencies? The odd socks, a little bit disorganized in their personal life, but in their professional life, they're at the top of their game. What about someone perhaps who has a very strong tan and a bit of a vacant look, always carrying water? So is that the athlete? Someone who really enjoys exercise and outdoors, who wants to be on holiday and abroad all the time, but is slightly preoccupied. Again, what kind of secret are they hiding? You're creating an interesting character. You're not giving everything away. You're not just telling and stating explicitly. You're making us as readers be intrigued and we're trying to find out, you're making it implicit. What about someone who always wears a suit, always wears a tie, even at the weekend, with slick back hair, always constantly checking their phone? Could this person be a gang member or some kind of criminal? Because it's about outward appearance being part of their uniform, and that constant checking phones. So think about effective characterization that really links with your purpose and that doesn't give everything away all at once. Don't just say he is a scientist, she is a doctor, he is an athlete. Don't just give us clues, give us specific details. Also think about the choice of nouns, so all sorts of words that you want to connect with your character. The one that we'll be looking at in a moment is a chef, so there will be obviously chopping boards and knives. There will obviously be garlic crushers and the cooker and flames. So all of these nouns will be there, but instead of just telling us about the nouns, just explain what they're doing with the nouns so we get a really strong sense of character. Again, this is indirect characterization that's appealing to your audience because it's interesting. You're intriguing us, you're adding mystery, you're adding clues, you're making us work hard. So peering at his laptop through the grime of his glasses, he tried to ignore the ring from the bottom of his coffee cup that slowly stained his paperwork. Loosening his tie and undoing the collar of his shirt, he felt the buzz of his phone in his pocket. I'll ignore it, I thought, reaching for his briefcase on the seat next to him. This is our workaholic scientist who, again, doesn't have kind of practical considerations, but he's at the top of his game professionally. He's got grimy glasses and things are a little bit unkempt and sticky and disgusting before he goes on his journey. And we've got a really strong sense of who he is because you're not telling us explicitly, you're giving us all these clues through all these different objects and how he's using them. Okay, let's think finally about the narrative arc. So as a grade 5 candidate, someone who's trying to secure it, you'll need to think carefully about structure. And obviously, stories often work with the narrative arc. It's the story mountain when you've got problems and difficulties reaching a peak, and then there are solutions, but something has changed, something has shifted. There's a new equilibrium. So you'll know that at the beginning of the narrative arc, there's a narrative hook. You're grabbing the reader's attention, something about this journey, something about the preparation of the journey, or perhaps it's dialogue. We get a sense of who this character is. Perhaps it's some kind of description of the setting that's exciting and engaging. Perhaps it's a small detail about an eye or a splodge. Perhaps it's an action that something has happened. Maybe it's a chase. It's this, that narrative hook is really getting us ready to understand what's going on with this character, who they are, and what kind of journey they're about to make and why. The exposition is describing, again, you're using indirect characterization, you're using clues to add mystery and intrigue, so the reader is working all the time to trying to work out who this character is. So describing the setting, where they are, the characters, who they are, giving clues, perhaps using foreshadowing, really perhaps including flashback to really build empathy or antipathy. It might be hatred for this main character. The rising actions where you're adding problems and surprises and obstacles and complication. You're adding crises and confusion to really link these events together. And then the climax is this moment of intensity where we're worried that things are going to go wrong permanently. But the falling solution, things begin to take a turn perhaps for the better. We can see an end to the problems. There are solutions, but at the end you may introduce more problems before you finish strongly. So thinking about our journey, I'm thinking about a story that you want to disturb and unsettle readers. So for your grade 5 standard, you're someone who is consistent, and so you're consistently thinking, right, what could I do that's interesting? What could I do that's going to really hook my reader's attention? Let's make a character that's a little bit unpleasant. So the narrative hook could be a bottle of ketchup smashing on the floor. For 2 or 3 reasons, that may be a good opening, because you've got the colour of the red, it looks like blood, it looks like violence, and if it's going to disturb and unsettle your readers, this is a good way to really unsettle them. But also setting it with food in a kitchen is really getting us the sense that this is your chef. And then in your exposition, you describe this ambitious chef. Perhaps it's the pristine uniform, perhaps there are medals around or certificates around in that particular kitchen. Perhaps you're describing the people he's shouting at angrily. Perhaps you're describing how he's measuring something or adding some kind of gold leaf or some kind of decoration to make this particular cake beautiful. So you provide clues about how arrogant he is, and you provide clues about how proud he is about what he does, and how he's already planning, before he gets an invitation to the awards ceremony, he's already planning his journey to attend the award ceremony, because he knows that the invitations will be coming soon. So you're foreshadowing this idea of being awarded and being celebrated, and maybe even give a flashback to the last time he had a prize, how boastful he was, how excited he was to really mock his competitors and components. So at this stage in the exposition, you're really building antipathy, because you're wanting to disturb and unsettle your readers. So you're not making a character that's engaging and positive. You're making someone that they're not going to like. You're doing on purpose. Then in the rising action, when he goes back to his office, he's surprised to see that he doesn't win the competition. So there are two envelopes side by side. One is the competition judges telling him that he hasn't won this year, and so that's shock and upset that he's dealing with. And the other is an invitation from his friend telling him to come over and spend time with him, have a weekend, but also that he's the one who's won the prize. So you've got this confusion of emotions there, and this kind of complication that the best friend has invited him to spend time at the weekend with him, but also is boasting about winning the prize. So the journey now to see his best friend is this journey of confusion and rage. So you could have this chef, both scenarios where he's stuck in the middle of traffic and he's not moving, and he's enraged by how his life isn't advancing. And then he's deserted. No one else seems to be there. This sense of isolation and abandonment and reject that he's feeling, and that's sadness. You could also, on the journey, decide this crisis where he goes the extra mile, literally and metaphorically, to find a special ingredient, but he gets lost. He's down a country lane, and eventually when he gets to the place, the ingredients have been sold out. So that feeling of angst and anxiety and anger and confusion is really there for the protagonist. Then in the climax, as he's climbing to see his friend, taking the cake that he wants to boast and show, he almost drops the cake that he's so proud, and he's going to show his friend that he almost drops the cake. That's that moment, that climax of his journey as he's walking through. And then the falling action is when the friend is happy to see him, and actually the friend doesn't boast, the friend doesn't say a word about the competition, and they actually spend time together enjoying each other's company. So we've got the resolution, we've got some of the problems are solved for this chef, but then you're introducing more problems, that the cake has an odd taste and the friend isn't sure about the taste. And then you end strongly when we realize that the chef has actually poisoned his friend. So you can see what you're doing in that story of a journey. You've got his journey, his emotional journey of disappointment by not winning the prize that was coveted, that he's won before by the judges, and he's not going to the award ceremony. He's going to spend time with his friend instead. You've got the journey where he's stuck in traffic, cramped in the car and heated and angry and full of anguish, and then he's abandoned that no one else is on the road. He's going down alleys and on the wrong track and trying to find a special ingredient that's sold out, and yet he is, despite almost dropping the cake, he's able to spend this lovely weekend with his friend. But by the end, there's a bitter taste in the mouth, metaphorically and physically, because he's poisoned the cake and poisoned his friend. Okay, I hope that you can see that that would be the kind of thing you could write to secure your level 5, because you are thinking about making it interesting and consistently interesting and connected and appealing, and linking your character with your purpose. You're using indirect characterization. You're thinking about the narrative arc so that you are securing your grade 5 for this particular piece. I hope that that's helped you. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you.